Hi everybody. In the spirit of like pure transparency, some phrases that you will not hear in this talk. Do what you love. Do awesome work for awesome people. Put your work out there. Find happiness in your work. Be original, be fearless, be shameless, be yourself, be happy. And my own personal favorite, the harder you work, the luckier you get. That's not to, belittle anybody who's managed to just do the work that they love to do and have it be wildly successful for them. But that's just not really how it's happened for me. And I guess if there's one quote which kind of sums up how I've come through my career, how I've come through life, it's I don't know, I'm making it up as I go along. Does anybody know what worldly wise scholar said that? Indiana Jones. So hello again, my name's Stewart, I'm from Scotland. And when I was in high school, an art teacher of mine introduced me to the work of this guy who's a sculptor called Andy Goldsworthy. And it was on discovering his work that I decided that that's what I wanted to do for a living, be in art and design, whatever that might mean. I just loved the repetition in his work. He uses all natural materials in their natural environment, and there's just something about the tension, in that work that just really, really spoke to me. So my last couple of years at high school were spent basically preparing my portfolio so as I could go study fine art at the Glasgow School of Art. And I did all that work, sent off the portfolio, patiently waited for the acceptance letter to come back. The letter came, but they rejected me. So I think everybody can kind of relate to that feeling at one point or another. So it was well, what's going to be next, I hadn't really considered the fact that that plan wasn't going to work out. So I applied to another couple of places. I applied to Dundee Art School, which is on the east coast of Scotland, and they didn't want me. And I applied to Edinburgh Art College, who also rejected me. And at that point in time, being a young kid from a small town in Scotland, I just hadn't really considered the possibility of going and studying elsewhere. So I ended up studying industrial design at a local Glasgow college. It wasn't even a degree, it was 3 years. I didn't even particularly enjoy it, but I left. And I was unemployed for 6 or 7 months, which wasn't much fun either. But eventually, I got a job working for an actuarial consultant, and they would give me stuff like this and tell me to go make it look impressive on a PowerPoint slide, which is definitely as hard as it sounds. I also got to do all these PowerPoints for when they would go and present their pension schemes to various people. I didn't have Illustrator, I didn't have Photoshop, I didn't have any of those things. I literally had PowerPoint, Microsoft Word art, if anybody remembers that, and a CD-ROM of clip art, which I would use to build graphics. And they would come these financial people and go, okay, I want to tart up my presentation and have some cool graphics in there. I'd be okay, well, I'll do what I can, And they'd be they'd ask for weird stuff. They'd be okay, I want a fat man, in a boat, eating a sandwich. And then they'd be well, what it is he's enjoying life, but, he's hearing the news about his pension scheme being devalued, and he's looking to the future and wondering what's going to happen. And I'd be all right, it's getting kind of strange, but, whatever. And he'd be that's great, but we need them to look worried, you know? And I'm like, I don't have Photoshop. Like, I can't change. I can't, you know, morph the guy's face. The only worried face I've got is something like that. and, and I don't think you want that. And they would be like, oh my God, that is so good. You know? That's going to work perfectly. So that was essentially what I did for like 5 years in my first job. Another like quick piece of advice, something I learned pretty early on, was like how spell check doesn't always save you. This was like one of my first print jobs, and I was like super proud of it. It was about public sector pensions, and I got 30,000 of these like little leaflets printed. They had like a nice like laminate on it. There was even a little bit of spot varnish on there. Like, I was like super proud. I even got some extras made to like go around and put on everybody's desk. And then I realized that I'd missed out a letter. And they'd all gone, you know. So like for the whole next week, I had people coming up to me going, "Did you see what was on there? Did you see? Did you see? Did you see?" So then it's like, okay, there has to be more like to life and creativity than this, you know? So you get to that point where you're kind of like thinking, okay, what's next, you know? Do I want to keep doing this? Do I want to try something else? Is this even the thing for me? So you think about it and then like ponder it a little bit more. And then like sooner or later, you just kind of have to like take your best guess and then like hope you're going to get out the other side, you know? So that's what I did. Took a little bit of a leap of faith and quit my job, bought a one-way ticket to Amsterdam. I knew a couple of people there. I slept on their floor for like 2 or 3 weeks while I got myself sorted out. And cut a little bit of a long story short, really fortunately, I ended up, like Nike have their headquarters in Amsterdam, and I ended up working there and designing for their global football unit, or soccer, sorry. And I worked on like product like this for like some of the best athletes in the world, like on the biggest stage in the World Cup. And you know, that was really great. I also met my wife there. We got married in Timberline Lodge in Oregon. I'm not going to show like a bunch of work here, but my one like proudest moment of all of the stuff that I did there was when my uniform for Portugal in the World Cup showed up on like The Simpsons, and so when that happened, I felt kind of like, you know. But while I was there, that was when I really like started learning and, you know, working out like the things that were important to me and the things that were important about life and how I wanted to like do my work and, you know, manage my career. The first one is like the final 1%. When I first got to Amsterdam, like I was sleeping on a friend's floor. I didn't have any money to go rent a place for myself, so I just needed to get a job, you know. And kind of a little bit ironically, considering I work for CNN now, I ended up in a call center that dealt with calls for like Time Magazine and National Geographic, and like people would call me up with their like subscription questions and why didn't I get that issue, and I need to change my address and all of that kind of stuff. And one day, I got a call from like an elderly gentleman that lived in Amsterdam. And he told me on the phone that he was like a veteran of the Battle of Arnhem in World War II. And that week's issue of National Geographic was like a D-Day remembrance special, and like he hadn't gotten it, and you know he was pretty upset. So the computer system that I used at that time, it was MS-DOS based, if anybody remembers that. It was completely horrible to use, and I didn't trust my own ability in being able to like use the computer system and send these missing issue off to him. So I went to the back issue room and pulled the copy myself. And on the way home, like I put it in an envelope and like cycled over to his house and delivered it to him personally. And like the look on his face, like when he answered the door, you know, and I was there like just a couple of hours after he'd spoken to me, it was absolutely priceless. And it was those kind of things that just made me think, like going that little bit extra, it can really make like a huge amount of difference. Another couple of examples of what I mean by like the final 1%. There's this movie called Any Given Sunday, and Al Pacino has this quote, life's this game of inches, the inches we need are everywhere around us. And that was something that we used when I was at Nike, and we did these World Cup uniforms, and we had this insight that like most game-winning goals are scored like in the last 10 minutes because like people are getting tired, they're physically tired, they're mentally tired, they're more likely to make a mistake. So what we tried to do was make the uniform as light as possible, have it like wick the sweat away from their body. And I don't know if you can really see, but we even went so far as to like perforate the numbers like on the shirt so they would lose that tiny percentage of weight and breathe that little bit more, and hopefully that might just give them like the final like 1%. Another example is like when I was like a young teenager, I was like super into metal, and back when there wasn't any Spotify or anything like that, you judged whether you wanted to buy the album based on the cover art, the song tracks on the back, and how cool the band looked. So like this, like for me, like checked all three of those straight off. And there's a song on there at the end. It's called Rain and Blood. It's 4 minutes and 14 seconds long, and if you take away like the spooky thunder and lightning sound effects at the beginning and the end, you're left with 2 minutes 50 music. And in that 2 minutes 50, there's 4 verses, 5 tempo changes, 8 different riffs, and 1 face-melting guitar solo. And, you know, there's like so many ideas like just contained in that 2 or 3 minutes worth of music. You would have forgiven the band for like taking those and stretching that out to like half an album's worth of material, but they didn't. They like put it all into one, and essentially by doing that, they pretty much like defined that genre of music. Another like obvious 1% reference would be Stanley Kubrick. I know Alonso talked about him yesterday, but when he made the movie Barry Lyndon, at the end of the process, he sent out this letter to the projectionists, which was like, you know, I've taken an infinite amount of care on this movie, the photography, the sets, the costumes, the color grading, and careful handling of the film will make this effort worthwhile. So like he sent this out to everybody that was projecting the film, and it has like notes on, you know, when to change the reels, like the soundtrack, when you should play side 1, side 2. Like he didn't want to leave like anything to chance. So that for me is like definitely like the final like 1% of effort. So the second thing I guess that I learned was just about working hard. Now, I know like everybody here like works really hard. Everybody does like long hours, you know, to do the things that they really want to try and get to. But like, what does that look like for me? It's definitely not that, you know, because that's kind of abstract. But I'll take it back to Andy Goldsworthy. And this is a series of pictures when he's building this ice arch sculpture. And what he's doing is like taking pieces of a frozen lake and melting one side and having that refreeze, like to make the shape. But he has like a lot of like setbacks. He has a lot of failures. But every time he does it, he learns something more about the material that he's working with. The material that he's working with is communicating back to him and giving him some more insight as to how to get to the final piece, which when he gets there is like pretty amazing. So there's definitely something that I try and learn about, like, whatever the setbacks are, whichever, the drafts that don't work, as long as you're like taking something from them and moving forward, that's the important thing. I love this like diary entry that he did about this piece. It goes, ice arch, left to freeze overnight before supporting pile of stones removed. Made in field of cows, tense wait. Pissed on stone, too frozen to come out, 3 arches. That's the 1% there, isn't it? Like, urinating on your own artwork. 3 arches collapsed or melted, 4th attempt successful. Okay, and number 3, like 2 really short tales about being humble. So I've been working at CNN for like the last 13, 14 months. And you remember like back when that Vine app came out, everybody was all over it and wanted to do something with it. And it was around Valentine's Day, and they came up with this like concept that they were going to like have people submit their Valentine's Day Vines, and they would choose like the best 5 and put them on TV. So I had a cameraman like come down to the digital newsroom, and I would like create this stop motion Vine, and he was like shooting over my shoulder. There wasn't any sound involved, so we were just like talking, we were just chatting about the usual stuff about our kids and our summer holidays and where I was from and where he was from, and the usual kind of chit chat. And it was only like as he was like packing up to get ready to go that we started talking about like his career and where he'd been and what he'd done. He'd like worked for CNN for like 30 years. He'd been there since like almost the beginning. And it was only like literally as he was walking out the door, I was like, so where have you been? Like, you must have like seen some cool stuff. And he's like, yeah, I was in China and Japan for like quite a few years, and like remember that footage from Tiananmen Square where it was like the guy standing in front of the tanks? Like that was me that shot that. I was like on a roof across the street, and I was like, man, like if that was me, like I'd be like telling the world, And the last tale. Just about being humble is like going back to the call center days in Amsterdam. I'd been there for like 2 or 3 weeks, and I noticed like something kind of strange going on, and that was like occasionally like I'd get people calling up, and I couldn't really work out like what they were calling for. Like usually if it gets to the point where we're like calling our cell phone company or calling the bank, we've generally got a problem and we just want to get on there and have them sort it out and get off as quickly as possible. But occasionally there was people that I just couldn't like get them to tell me what was wrong. It was like they'd ask me where they were calling and why is a Scotsman in Amsterdam and what's the weather like and all of this kind of stuff. I couldn't work it out. And eventually I realized what it was. They were calling me because they were lonely. And they didn't have anybody else to talk to. They'd like find the little customer service number at the back of the magazine. and they'd call it up, like just to hear the sound of another human voice. So I talked to them, you know. My productivity was in the toilet, you know, like, but you could tell the difference just by talking to them for like 20 or 30 minutes. When they called up, they were like really low and flat. But when you just like talk to them about like everyday stuff, like after 20 or 30 minutes, they were right back up, you know? And by just like giving them that little investment in time, like you don't know if you're like making somebody's day, somebody's week, or somebody's year, you know? And that was like a really like important discovery for me. It's just like trying to invest like time and people, you know, just like even if it like takes some time out of your day, you just like never really know, like by saying something really simple, like what a difference it could make to somebody. Finally, like one last thing, one of my favorite images of all time. You didn't think you were going to be seeing John Lennon's naked buttocks in this presentation. Like, if you probably know the story behind this image. This is like John Lennon and Yoko Ono, like in New York, shot by Annie Leibovitz. Literally like a few hours before he was shot outside the hotel in New York. And every time I see it, I just think like they didn't know at that point like that was going to be like one of the last times they got to embrace. They didn't know it was going to be like one of the last times, you know, they got to kiss, you know. Troy's making me emotional, like after his thing, like. So ultimately, like if there's one thing, like just one thing that you need to do every day, it's connect with people, like on an emotional level. Because ultimately, that's what makes the world a better place. Thank you very much.